Hi, and welcome back to our CwC Sumo project. This is the third video, and last video we ended with me saying that we were going to start doing enemy waves so that would build up over time, but instead we're going to hold off on that one, and we're going to work on doing power-ups. The intent behind this one is that whenever our enemy collects a power-up, they'll be able to hit the enemies harder for a brief period of time. So that's going to require us making the power-ups, changing the intensity by which they can hit, and then making a cooldown so that after a few seconds that will no longer happen. There's a lot of good stuff here. This is probably the densest material in this project, but I really like what we're doing today, because I think this is where it starts feeling like you're doing real game design or getting to the meat of coding. So let's get started. I haven't seen my project in a little while, so I'm going to do that now with Command S. I was pretty bad about that last project. We did a lot of work and I didn't save it, so I want to make sure I save now. So let's go ahead and create our power up. Inside of our course library, you do have a folder called Pickups, and Pickups has a bunch of different items here. And we can do whatever it is that you'd like. I'm probably going to go with the power icon. I think that looks pretty cool. So I'm just going to drag this into my hierarchy. If I do that, then it automatically places it at 0, 0, 0. So what I probably want to do, let me just move this a little bit. How about I move it to 0 on the X, 0 on the Y, and a Z of 4. So just like that, just a little bit. Let me zoom in here so I can see it a little bit better. That might be better. Okay. Well, I don't really like that size as much. Let me make it bigger. So I'm going to scale it up 2, 2, 2. Does that look pretty good? It's probably a little too big. No, I think it's fine. And it can tell that it's kind of clipping into the ground here some. So let me pick it up. Last time we did like 0.1. That's not enough. Let's do 0.5. 0.5 looks great. Perfect. So when I put it into the scene, even though it's prefabbed, it has a mesh renderer. So this is what allows it to appear in the world, what it looks like. And then it's transform. Let me go ahead and just change this name to Power Up. And I'll use this as one word for the sake of our project. I know I haven't pressed return yet because the name is still power icon in the hierarchy, so I'm going to press return. And now that I see the name is updated, I know it's saved that name. You just, whatever icon you decide to go with, just make sure that it's not in the ground and that the size isn't too big, but big enough that your player can probably hit it. Let's go ahead and add a component too. We're going to make it so that we want to collide with it. So we'll add I'll do a box collider. And just from looking here, this is pretty good. I mean, it generally should snap pretty close to the shape that you want. That looks great for me. For this, we're going to be trying to trigger something in a script. So whenever we hit this object, it'll trigger something. We use an on trigger. So let's take our box collider and say is trigger. I think that's everything we want to do. I wonder if I want to go ahead and tag this as power up. You know what? I don't think it's going to hurt. So I'm going to go ahead and add a tag as well. Plus, and let's call this power up. And I'm putting it as one word with a capital P, no space, no capital U, it's just one word, save. And even though I made the tag, it clearly is not on there. By the way, tags start at 0, just like an array. Just want to point that out. Tag, untagged, and let me add that tag. There's no harm in us doing that. The last thing is I want to prefab this, because this is not going to be something that's always going to be in the world. It's going to spawn randomly, just like our enemies are. So go back into my assets folder, prefabs, and drag this power up into here and create an original prefab. Great. All right, so we want to make this object here destroy when we hit it. Now we can do this two ways. We could create a new script for our power up and say, okay, if on trigger enter it hits the player, then destroy this self. But a lot of what we're going to be doing when we hit the power up is on the player itself. So like we want the player to be able to hit enemies harder. So instead of creating a new script, let's just do everything on our current player script. So go back into assets. I'm going to save this, Command S, just out of habit. Scripts, and on our player controller. So let's do everything here. Right now this script isn't too complicated, but I think in this this video it's going to get a little bit more is going to be happening here. So we're using on trigger enter. We know we're going to be using triggers because we set that on our collider. So let's make a new method. So I'm going to enter my line 23 and press return twice, and private void on trigger enter, and it automatically set this to say collider other, which is fine. So when we reference the collision or the whatever other object we hit, it'll be called other. So line 27, whenever we collide with something with the tag power up, I'm just got to think through this. Whenever we hit something called power up, what we're going to want to do is destroy that other object. So let's type that in there. If, by the way, this is a conditional. So if we collide with it, if other dot compare tag, we know what compare tag is. So if we look at the other tag, open up this argument, and the string name, the proper name, is what I typed on the tag over here. So let me go find that really quick. Uppercase P, all one word, all that stuff. So power up. And then since this is a conditional, it doesn't end with a semicolon, we put some more curly brackets. If other dot compare tag is called power up, let's destroy, and the argument is the other dot game object. Oh, it's lowercase g, game object. Okay, so we could probably go test this. Let's go do that. Command S. So if our player hits something something with the tag power up, I'm giving it a second to compile. Looks good. Just make sure I go the right direction. Oh, forgot my enemies there. Boom. Well, we know it worked because it instantly killed my killed this here. Great. So that destroyed it. So what we want to do is make it so that whenever we collide with that, we now trigger something. Like we want to make it so that it's a true-false statement. We want to say, okay, did I hit this? And if I did, then we'll add greater force to our player when they hit the enemy. So it's going to be either it is or it isn't, or a true or false. So we know we probably need to have a Boolean to hold that information. So at the very top, I will go ahead and create a, I say very top, up here with my variables. I'm going to create a new variable. It's going to be a public bool, and I don't know, has power up. Let's just do it like that. Has power up. And we're not going to initialize this. Actually, let's go ahead and set this to false. So when the game starts, we'll say that you don't have it. There you go. That's fine. We'll initialize it up here as being false. That is not true when the game starts or whenever we initiate. But if we do hit the power up, let's set that to be true. So I'm going to put above the destroy so that it will just happen before we do the destroy. Has, just for the sake of logic. And we'll set this to being true. So if you hit it, it is true. Great. And you know what? Since this is public, let's see if it works over here in our inspector. So I'm going to save it, go back over here. Let's find my player. And right here, has power up is a boolean, so it should hit a check mark if we hit that power up. Okay, last time I was pretty lucky. Oh, can I do it? Can I do it? Can I do it? No, no, no. You know, I didn't do it, but let me try it again. It's hard with that enemy running around. Oh, just go. Oh my gosh. Can I hit him? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to cheat just a little bit. I'm going to move that power up like right in front of my player, and I'm going to move him over here so I can just press up. Yours might be different because yours might be set up properly. I think it might messed up. Oh wait, did I go under it? Did I pick it up too high? Yeah, I did. I didn't mean to pick it up. Let's set Y back to like what, 0.5? Is that what I did? Yeah, and I still want to move it like here. Okay, that's better. I didn't realize I picked it up on the Y. Let's just go up and boom. And you know what I didn't do? I maximized on play. So I never saw my player. I'm making all kinds of gaffes. Okay, I'm trying to watch this here. And does it check? Yes, that boolean is working. Great, that's what we wanted. Cool. So our next step is we have that as a conditional, but we haven't actually done anything to make it so that our player is more powerful. So we should probably make it so that when we hit, we should be able to check for our enemy. Let's use tags as well on our enemies and say, if we hit our enemy and we have the power up, let's make we'll punch harder when we collide with something. So let's go to our prefabs. Let's take our enemy. Let's make a tags to check for things. So enemy, I'm going to open the prefab. And it says it is untagged, but let's create a new tag called enemy. Enemy. And make sure you spell it correctly. Because this is going to be a string. This is something we're going to pull concisely. Now we've made it, but we still have to put it back on this. So click on it here. And then tag, it says untagged, but now we have an enemy tag to apply to it. There you go. Great. All right, get out of here. So we have an enemy tag. So let's go back to our player script. So let's think through this a little bit. If we collide with so we were using triggers to pick up on our power up. The reason why we did the collider, by the way, instead of like a rigid body, is we don't want to like hit this power up and like bounce off of it. We don't want physics to be working on this here. We want to be able to pass through it and then make it go away, because this will kind of mess up the activity of the game. But our enemy does have like a rigid body and, you know, collider and all this. So we're just going to be using the on collision enter opposed to the on trigger enter we're using for the power up. So let's go down here below our on trigger enter. So check your brackets here, your curly brackets. You want to be above the last one. Now let's create a private void and on collision enter. Now when this one creates, it creates a collision. So now it says, okay, the collision's name is collision, almost like a variable name. And let's do another conditional. If collision dot game object dot compare tag, and we're looking to see if we hit something called enemy with a capital E, and let's see if we have the power up and has power up. So if that is true, you don't have to say equals true here, because by just saying this, it infers that you do have it. I mean, it's almost the same as saying equals true. That is the same thing. So you're checking to see if it's true. but we don't have to type that out. We can just leave it like that. So I just wanted to point out there's a shortcut. So here we're setting it to be true, and here it is checking for. So this basically equals true. A lot of equals in that sentence. Then let's do something. Let's just get it to show up as a message, like would this Powerup be activated? So I'm going to press return. I'm going to open up some curly brackets since this is a conditional. We have to finish the thin part of the statement. So if this is true, if we hit something called enemy and we have the Powerup set to true, then let's do something called a debug. Now some of you in class have done debugs while you've had trouble to show you how to check for things, but if this is me officially introducing them to the class. So a debug, not debug, a debug.log, capital L. And what this does is when we put something into our debug, it will show up in the console. So this window here called console, and it'll give us a message that we can look at. That's a really great way to see where things are or aren't working. So if you're triggering something or you're colliding and it isn't working, I usually put a debug in to give me a message to let me know, oh, is it really triggering or not? So debug.log, and let's come up with a message. So open up an argument here, and we need to make a string. We need to actually put in sentences that we want to see in the console. So since it's a string, since it's a series of words, we're going to say player hit, and we're going to add more to this. We're going to say, you know what, we're going to hit collision. So what in this right here will tell us, I gotta spell collision right though, dot game object. So player hit plus the name of the thing we hit. So it should show up enemy. We hit the enemy plus, and let's make it say if we have the Powerup set to true or false. With Powerup set to, and finally we'll say outside of that string plus has Powerup, and this will tell us if this is true or false. Let's put a semicolon. So this is like a longer line of a debug. Usually I just like put a little message in like player hit and that's it. But we want to return what object did we hit and if the Powerup is true. So let me save this. I can tell that I haven't saved. Let's go back in. So what should happen is if we hit the Powerup and our enemy, we want to hit the Powerup first, then hit our enemy, then we should be able to get that debug message. So I'm going to try to quickly go up here. There you go. That's great. Okay. There it is. And perfect. I'm going to pause it right here. And sure enough, we hit enemy, and it was a clone of our enemy with the Powerup set to true, which means we did get this to be true. The reason why there's no gap here is in my debug, I forgot to put player hit, put a space there. So it creates a space between this, and let's say set to true. Create a space there. Let me save that. Let me just go back into here. Let me see if I can get it to happen again. So it looks more like a normal sentence. It might make a little bit more sense if I have the right spaces. Okay, go up. Come on, get it first. Come on. There you go. Enemy, come hit me. Come on, hit me, buddy. There you go. So we hit the enemy clone with the Powerup set to true. Great. Now, if this is true, then do this. Yeah, this is exactly what we wanted to have happen. All right. So instead of a message, though, we want to do more than just put a message in the console. We actually want to punch our enemy. So if we're going to push them using physics, then we need to get their rigid body. So let's keep this as a local variable. Let's just keep it inside of here. We've done this a couple times, and it's because we're not using that variable anywhere else. We can put variables inside of these if statements or these inside of these methods. So line 38 for me, I'm going to press return. Here we don't put private or public or anything like this. It's assumed to be private if you put it inside of this method. So we need to get the enemy's rigid body. So rigid body. So this is the type we're going to get, and we need to give it a name, and I'll call it enemy RB, capital R, lowercase b, is equal to, if we collide with a game object, let's get its component, because this is on our player. So when our player hits another game object, let's get its component. And since we're doing get component, it goes inside of these carets, and let's get its rigid body. And we have to put a blank, empty argument there for what we're doing. Great. So we're going to get their rigid body. So we need to have a rigid body, and we need to be able to apply a force to it. So if we're going to do a force, we need to know how hard we're going to hit and in what direction. And we want the enemy, if we hit them, to go the opposite direction of us. So to do that, by the way, I saved Command S. Let's first come up with our direction. So if I'm thinking directions, the thing I'm thinking in is vector 3. So let's create a variable to hold the direction we want them to go, which is away from us. So vector 3, and let's call it away. This is its variable name, away from player. And let's initialize it. Let's go ahead and set this to something. And let's think. Let's take their transform and minus ours. So basically, we're going to push them away from ours. I don't know how else to explain that. Let's just go with it here. So if we do that, let's take the collision dot game object. So wherever we hit, oops. So whenever we hit something, let's get its rigid body, and let's take its transform dot position and subtract ours, our player's transform dot position. And that will basically say we want to go opposite of our player. Whatever direction they came from, go back that way. That's essentially what this variable is saying. Let me save that. So we've made two variables here and a message, but we haven't done anything with them. So let me press return. I'll press return twice because these are variables up here on the top, and I like to create a little space before that and then a line that's actually doing something. So let's push our enemy's rigid body. Enemy rigid body dot, and then we're going to move it, so we're going to add a force. Add force. So it says right here, vector 3, we need to know what vector 3 and what force. Well, for vector 3, we already created one called away from player, which is we want to move it, we want to apply a force pushing it away from our player. So away from player. And then we need to multiply it by a force. And we need to come up with a number to how far we want how hard we want to hit when we have a power up. So if we have a power up and we hit an enemy, let's create a number. So I'm going to go to the very top. Let's hold it up here. So line 11, press return. Let's do a public so we can change this in the inspector. And float. I think it has to be a float. I'm not really sure actually. And let's call it power up strength. This is how hard we want to hit. Let's go ahead and initialize this. Let's set this up here so we don't forget to do it. And I'll set it to 15F. So a strength of 15. Let's come down here. Back to line 43. Enemy rigid body dot add force. And the argument is away from players are vector 3 times power up strength. And the other thing we should do is tell it how to apply this. So this is a comma force mode. We need to choose a force mode. Remember, we have 4 of them. And with this force mode, we want to do 2 things. We want to look at the mass of our enemy's rigid body. So that's either end pulse or force. And we want to do it instantaneously. in one frame you want to hit that force. So that leaves us with impulse. Almost like jumping, but we're instantaneously going to do this. So let's do force mode dot impulse. There you go. And let's put a semicolon. So what this should do is, let me save this. And I was still in play mode. Let me get out of play mode over here. Get the power up, hit our player, and it should just slingshot our enemy far away. I want to make sure I'm on a player so I can see. And my power up strength is here. I'm going to press play. Let's see what we get. Go up. Come on, enemy. Hit me. There you go. Great. We like knocked the snot out of them. They flung way off of there. That looks great. That looks pretty good. But the problem is that right now the player will have that power up for the rest of the game, which is not what we want. We want it to only have it for a limited amount of time. So we need to find a way to make it so that our player only does it for a brief period of time. So I'm going to go back into my player script. You know what? Back in my project, let me save. Trying to be good about that. All right, back in my player controller. All right, this is like one of my favorite things to be teaching you, because I don't know why I love this, but it excites me. It's something called a coroutine. So let's do it, and I'll explain it along the way. So what we want to create is a timer that will wait for a certain amount of time, and then when that time is up, then we're going to turn off the power up. So this is what's turning our power up on, is when we're hitting the power up. So let's go below it, line 34, press return. And let's create something called a IE numerator. Do I have to do void? I always forget. Void IE. Is it just IE numerator? Or is it? Oh, I think it's just private. There it is, private. Always forget which one I do. IE numerator. And we're going to add a name for this IE numerator. So just like any other method we've created, we got to give it a name. And let's call it Power Up Countdown. How about Powerup Timer? Let's just do that. And we have to put an argument and press, since it's a method, we're going to add the curly brackets and press return. I think that works. So what this is what we call a coroutine. And the purpose of this is, instead of doing something in our update checks every frame. So if we were to put like a timer up here, every frame it would restart that timer, which is not helpful. It wouldn't do a good job of keeping track of something over time. So this happens outside of the update, and these coroutines are great because they can do something over multiple frames. And this is why it's good for timers, because timers don't want to check every frame. They want to exist outside of a single frame. Like this on trigger enter is checking in a frame if this happened. This is looking for a collision in a frame. This adding force is adding a force. Even though it's adding it in one frame or can add it over time, it still is checking for this every frame. So this coroutine is good for timer. So let's go ahead and put into our timer. Now, it is going to be trying to give us a result, almost like a return. So we're going to yield a return, and it's going to be a new return. And we're going to say wait. And you see you have a bunch of these. Wait for seconds, real time. We're going to be wait for seconds. And then we need to have an argument. And we need to tell it, well, right here it says float seconds. How many seconds? And we're going to put 7 and put a semicolon. So this will now, well, we haven't called it yet, but this will make it so that after 7 seconds, the power up will go away. And so press return, and after 7 seconds, what we want to have happen is just turn off that Boolean has power up, because the power won't work if this part of the condition isn't true. If this is set to false, then it won't be able to hit the enemy. Punch the enemy super far. So let's just do has Powerup equals. So we're using 1 equal sign because we're setting it to be false. Now, the problem is we haven't actually done anything with this yet. So in our onTrigger enter, if we hit the Powerup, let's turn it off. So after line 32, press return, let's call this coroutine. So the way that you do that is you type in start coroutine, and then it needs to know an argument. It needs to know what IE numerator. What are we doing? And the code. So we're going to say start, and the name is Powerup Timer, and it needs to know like an argument for the method. So we still have to include these parentheses here, like that. So make sure you have, open here, open, close, close, and let's put our semicolon. All right, I hope that kind of makes sense. I know there's a lot going on here, but basically if we hit something, we trigger something with a onTrigger collider with a tag called Powerup. We're going to make it true, and then start a coroutine that will count for 7 seconds, and then turn off the has Powerup to false, and that will make it so that this works only for 7 seconds. So I guess our thing is we're going to just need to watch it inside of our inspector to see if this is true. So we're going to move up, hit it, has Powerup is up, and let's just watch for like 7 seconds. And yeah, sure enough, it turned off after 7 seconds. Great. But you know what? Instead of us having to watch the inspector, and this will be the last thing we can do in this video because this has turned to be a very long video, is let's make it so we can see it in the game. Let's use an indicator to tell us what's going on. So in your project folder, assets, course library, by the way, make sure you save. Done. Okay. There is a Powerup Indicator folder. And you have a couple of different options. A balloon. No, that's okay. Selection ring, selection ring, selection ring. I like this one right here, 02. That looks good. And I'm going to drag it into the scene. I'm going to double click it to find it. And it looks like it's like right in the middle of my player, but it's pretty small compared to them. So I guess I'm going to change its scale. Let's try X of 2, Y of 2, and still isn't big enough. Let's go X of 4. Now I'm starting to see it. Y of 4, Z of 4. I think that looks pretty. I mean, like from here, my game view, that looks pretty reasonable. I think it looks good. Do I want to lift it up? If I lift it up some. I don't think I need to. I think Y of 0 is fine. I can see it. Now this isn't actually going to like interfere with our game, so we obviously don't want this to hit our enemies. So this won't have a rigid body. But so as long as the Powerup is on, we want this to be there. So let's change the name of this in our inspector. Let's call it Power space indicator. I'm trying to use like non-complicated words so there's no chance of misspelling. But and this little check mark here, in the last video I pointed out with our enemy that I unchecked it, but there's a word for that that I would rather you use. So on my power indicator, I'm going to make this inactive, so no longer make it active. And in our script, we can actually control this. We can actually control anything that has this button on it. So on our player, we could turn scripts off, which is really, really helpful by making scripts active or inactive. You can turn off rigid body, colliders if you want to. So this is a really, really useful line of code I'm about to show you. But we're basically going to say whenever we pick up a power-up, we're going to make this power indicator active, and we're going to make sure that its position is going to be where the player is, so that it's always on the player no matter where the player is. We could just be lazy here and make it a child of the player so that's always with it, but why do that when you can script it? So that's me kind of joking, but I think this is a good practice for that, so that's why we're going to do that. So just like everything else, let's make this work inside of our player. So because we're already looking here to see if we hit a power up, let's just make a public. So line 12. We could in the start method go get that game object, but let's just do it in the inspector. Public game object, and we'll call it Powerup Indicator. Indicator. Make sure I spell that. And then a semicolon at the end of that. And in our on trigger, if we hit something called Powerup, we want the indicator to be true. So I'll put it here at the end after that coroutine. So line 35 for me, I will say Powerup Indicator dot game object dot set active. So that's the little line that's really useful for this, is turning things on and off. You can turn off other game objects, you can turn off scripts. I've already talked about that, but it's really cool. And we need an argument, and it says set active a Boolean value. We don't actually have to make a Boolean. We just have to say if it's true or false. So we want that indicator to turn on, so we'll make it true. Put a semicolon. And then inside of our Powerup timer, when the 7 seconds is over, let's have it turn off. So line 42. Powerup indicator dot game object dot set active, and open up that argument, and we will set it to be false. It is no longer going to be on. It'll turn back off. So what about its position? Well, we could just take the player's position. So we can set the Powerup indicator's position to the player's position in the update. So every time it'll just always be where the player is. Because update checks all the time. So let's do it here in the update. So line 25. So instead, so let's do power indicator dot transform dot position. Do I need to make it? Transform dot position is equal to transform dot position, because I don't have to put player dot transform dot position, because one, I haven't made a variable called player, but since this is player controller is on the player, it knows that whatever I'm attached to, it's transform dot position. So the Powerup indicator will always be where the player is. That's it. So instead of parenting it, making the Powerup indicator a child of the player, we can just do it here in that one line of code. Let's save that. I think that's everything we need, except we have one step to do, is that our player on its script, it doesn't know what the Powerup indicator is. So we just need to drag that from the hierarchy into here. Now the reason it doesn't matter if we got this from the hierarchy, because we didn't prefab this. We didn't add anything to it. And this won't be destroyed at any point. So this will always be in the game. Unlike in the past when we've had animals or enemies, when they've gotten destroyed, they're gone from the hierarchy when that happens. This will never happen. So we should see an indicator once we hit the power. Let's see if that works. Boom, there you go. So now we know as long as we have the power up on, it will be there. This enemy's not very good at hitting this. And then it goes away. So I think what we need to do now is next video, we'll make it so that our power-ups keep spawning over time. So basically a spawn manager for our power-ups. get out of here, fool. And then we'll start working on waves for our enemy. Sorry for the long video, but after we save, I will be ready to help you with the next one.